Rose had been a bit nervous about her first day at the Galactic Interspecies Academy. As the only human exchange student at the school, she knew she'd stand out, and not just because of her appearance. The Academy was an impressive feat of intergalactic collaboration. It was an institution that hosted species from across the known universe, each student bringing their unique cultural background, physical abilities, and intellectual strengths. For centuries, the Academy had been a place of prestige and serious study, with strict rules and a heavy emphasis on discipline, logic, and the unerring pursuit of knowledge. Rose's class was a blend of species, each more distinct than the last. There was Zathrak, whose species had bioluminescent scales and communicated primarily through color changes and subtle pheromones. Next to him sat Emerala, a large, four-armed being who came from a world where extreme gravity made her one of the strongest and most physically imposing students in class. At the far end of the room, Rose could see a floating creature she had heard about but never seen up close, Kel, a being whose species had developed telepathic abilities and who appeared to be more cloud than solid form. Her alien classmates had bodies, expressions, and customs that were incredibly diverse, and they all had the same thing in common: their complete and utter bewilderment at the human girl sitting among them. Despite the initial curiosity, Rose was determined to make friends and find her place. She spent her first few days observing, taking note of the alien norms around her. But it quickly became apparent that her very human mannerisms weren't just different, they were sometimes incomprehensible to her classmates. On her third day, an incident occurred that would set off a series of misunderstandings, new experiences, and surprising revelations. Rose had been running late to class. She had underestimated the time it would take to navigate the Academy's sprawling hallways, and the rain outside had slowed her down even more. By the time she slipped into her classroom, she was drenched, her hair sticking to her face, and her clothes soaked through. She tried to move quietly, but her entrance was anything but subtle, drawing the attention of her classmates and her teacher, Professor Selnor. Professor Selnor was a tall, thin alien from the planet Eurixa, with elongated limbs and 3 eyes that could rotate independently of each other. His species was known for their exceptional memory and precision, and he ran his class with the same strict adherence to order and efficiency that his people prized. He regarded Rose with a look of mild disapproval as she settled into her seat, dripping water onto the floor. "Miss Rose, could you perhaps explain the reason for your tardiness?" Professor Selnor's voice was calm but carried an edge of impatience. Rose, still catching her breath, offered a wry smile. "Oh yeah, because I just love running across campus in the rain," she replied, her tone dripping with sarcasm. A brief but palpable silence followed her words. She noticed her classmates exchanging puzzled glances, and Professor Selnor's expression was one of confusion. Rose realized they were all taking her statement literally. She could almost see the wheels turning in their minds, as if they were trying to reconcile why a human would take pleasure in a situation that seemed objectively uncomfortable. After a moment, Professor Selnor tilted his head, his 3 eyes narrowing as he tried to understand her statement. "Miss Rose, are you suggesting that exposure to water is a source of enjoyment for humans?" Rose stifled a laugh, realizing she would need to explain sarcasm. "No, Professor. I didn't actually enjoy running in the rain. I was being sarcastic," she said, hoping her clarification would make things clearer. "Sarcasm," repeated Professor Selnor, as if tasting the word for the first time. His eyes moved in different directions, scanning his internal knowledge banks or processing the term through his translator. "I am not familiar with this term. Could you define it for the class?" Rose hesitated, aware that explaining sarcasm wasn't exactly straightforward, especially to beings who might not be familiar with the concept. "Well, sarcasm is when you say something, but you actually mean the opposite. It's like a way of being humorous or expressing frustration without directly saying it." Her classmates looked even more perplexed. Emerala, who was seated a few desks away, raised one of her 4 arms. But why would you say something you do not mean? She asked, her voice deep and resonant. In my culture, words are chosen carefully. To speak something untrue intentionally would be considered a form of deceit. Rose could feel the weight of their collective curiosity and skepticism pressing down on her. She understood that what was second nature to her, a casual sarcasm to express mild irritation, was entirely foreign to them. Well, it's complicated, Rose began, choosing her words carefully. In human culture, sarcasm is sometimes used as a way to deal with situations that are annoying or uncomfortable. It's not meant to deceive, it's more like venting in a humorous way. When I said I loved running in the rain, I didn't mean it literally. I was actually saying the opposite. Kel, the telepathic cloud-like student, hovered closer, his form shifting and pulsing as he attempted to process the information. So, you were expressing your discomfort by pretending to enjoy it? His voice echoed in Rose's mind, a gentle yet probing tone that made her feel as though her thoughts were being sifted through. Rose nodded. Exactly. It's a way of making light of a situation. Her classmates looked at one another, their expressions ranging from intrigued to baffled. She could see Zathrak's scales changing colors rapidly, an indication of heightened curiosity or confusion among his species. Professor Selnor cleared his throat, his three eyes focusing back on Rose. So, if I understand correctly, sarcasm is a form of indirect communication. It requires the listener to interpret the speaker's true intention, rather than accepting their words at face value. Rose smiled, relieved that he was beginning to grasp the concept. Yes, exactly. But it's also kind of an art form. You have to know when to use it and how. It's like a dance with words. The class fell silent as they absorbed her explanation. Rose could see her alien classmates exchanging glances, their expressions a mix of fascination and mild discomfort. She realized that sarcasm might be a much bigger cultural leap for them than she had anticipated. As the lesson continued, Rose noticed her classmates sneaking glances at her, as if trying to gauge whether her responses were genuine or sarcastic. The concept seemed to intrigue them, and she had a feeling they would be talking about it long after class was over. After the lesson, as Rose gathered her things, a few students approached her with questions. Emerale, the strong, four-armed student, looked at Rose with a mixture of admiration and bewilderment. This sarcasm, it is very complex. Do humans use it often? All the time, Rose replied with a grin. Sometimes it's subtle, sometimes it's obvious. It can be a way of bonding with friends, or just a way to deal with life's little annoyances. But not everyone is good at it. Zathrak's scales flickered to a curious shade of green as he chimed in. So it's a skill. You must be trained to do it correctly? Rose laughed. Well, not exactly. It's something we pick up over time. It becomes natural. But I guess it does require a certain sense of timing and knowing your audience. Kel, still hovering nearby, seemed to shimmer with what Rose could only interpret as interest. If we wish to learn this sarcasm, would you teach us? The question caught Rose off guard, but she realized it was an opportunity. She could introduce her classmates to a little piece of human culture, one that they would never encounter in any of their studies. And maybe, she thought with a smile, it would make her own time at the academy a bit more fun. All right, she agreed, laughing at the thought. I'll show you how it's done. But be warned, sarcasm is not for the faint-hearted. Her alien classmates looked at each other with a mixture of trepidation and excitement, as though they were about to embark on a journey into the unknown. Rose could see that, in their own way, they were eager to understand this strange, contradictory aspect of human culture. And so, with a mischievous twinkle in her eye, Rose prepared to introduce sarcasm to the Galactic Interspecies Academy, unaware that this small lesson in humor would have far-reaching consequences. As the days turned into weeks, Rose's unique sense of humor began to spread through the halls of the Galactic Interspecies Academy. What had started as an amusing curiosity to her alien classmates quickly grew into an almost viral phenomenon, as students across different species and departments attempted to grasp and use this strange new form of communication called sarcasm. It began in Rose's immediate circle, with her classmates experimenting in small, cautious ways. They were hesitant at first, worried that they might misunderstand or misuse sarcasm. After all, most of them had grown up in cultures where clarity and straightforwardness were highly valued. To them, sarcasm was an odd and confusing concept, a form of humor that required one to deliberately obscure meaning. But with Rose's guidance, her classmates gradually became bolder in their attempts. One day, Zathrak, the bioluminescence student, tried his first sarcastic remark during a break between classes. Rose had explained that sarcasm often involved saying something exaggeratedly positive about a negative situation, so he decided to give it a try. As he looked down at his meal, a bowl of slimy green paste that his species found nourishing but bland, he glanced at Rose with what he hoped was an exaggerated expression. "Oh yes," Zathrak said, his scales flickering with a shade of what Rose assumed was playful enthusiasm. "This food is absolutely delicious." Rose burst into laughter, surprising Zathrak, who hadn't expected such a strong reaction. He glanced around, his scales shifting between shades of pink and blue, a clear sign of his species equivalent to blushing. He was encouraged by Rose's amusement. He tried to keep a straight face, but he ended up laughing along with her. Other classmates looked over, intrigued by their interaction. Emerale, the four-armed, strong and stoic student, observed Zathrak's attempt with a mix of curiosity and confusion. She was known for her literal approach to communication, as her culture prized honesty and transparency above all else. Watching Rose laugh at Zathrak's obvious exaggeration left her puzzled but intrigued. As lunch continued, more students joined in, with each one trying to understand and replicate sarcasm in their own way. Emerale attempted next, picking up her tray and glancing at the long line of students waiting for their meals. "Oh, how wonderful," she said in her deep, steady voice. "I simply love standing in line." Her tone was so flat and monotone that it took a moment for Rose to realize she was attempting sarcasm. When it clicked, Rose couldn't contain her amusement, and she encouraged Emerale by nodding approvingly. "Not bad," Rose said, trying to stifle her laughter. "You'll get the hang of it." The cafeteria soon turned into a playground for budding sarcasm enthusiasts. Rose's classmates took turns trying to one-up each other with sarcastic remarks about everything from the uncomfortable chairs to the endless piles of homework. They weren't always successful sometimes. Their attempts were too subtle or too exaggerated, leading to misunderstandings. But with each try, they got better, and laughter became a regular sound in the once quiet cafeteria. Word spread quickly, and soon sarcasm was no longer confined to Rose's class alone. Students from other departments, intrigued by the concept, began showing up in the cafeteria just to observe the sarcasm sessions. They would watch, fascinated, as Rose and her classmates exchanged exaggerated compliments and ironic statements. Many of them took notes, eager to bring this newfound humor back to their own groups. One afternoon, a group of students from the linguistics department approached Rose, asking if she could give them a sarcasm seminar. They had been studying Earth languages and were curious to understand the deeper cultural nuances of human humor. They saw sarcasm as a linguistic phenomenon, something that could be dissected, analyzed, and categorized. Eager to share her culture, Rose agreed. She prepared a few examples and explained the rules or lack thereof behind sarcasm. The seminar turned out to be a massive success. Word of Rose's sarcasm class spread like wildfire, and before long she was giving impromptu lessons in sarcasm etiquette all over campus. Despite her best efforts to keep it lighthearted, Rose could sense that some students were taking sarcasm a bit too seriously. To her, sarcasm was just a casual form of humor, something that humans used to make light of situations or to bond with friends. But to her alien classmates, sarcasm was seen as a highly sophisticated form of linguistic art. They analyzed her every word, dissecting her tone, facial expressions, and even her body language. Rose's popularity grew rapidly, and with it came an unintended consequence. The Academy's culture began to shift. Conversations that had once been straightforward were now laced with sarcasm, often with mixed results. Professors were baffled as students responded to difficult assignments with phrases like, "Oh, fantastic, I just can't wait to work on this all night." Statements that left the teachers wondering if their students were being sincere or not. Soon enough, the teachers themselves became involved. Professor Sel-Noor, who had been the first to encounter Rose's sarcasm, found himself increasingly fascinated by the phenomenon. He began attending her seminars, not as an authority figure, but as a curious observer. His species valued precision, and he struggled to understand why anyone would deliberately obscure meaning. One day, after observing a particularly lively sarcasm session in the cafeteria, Professor Sel-Noor decided to give it a try. He approached Rose with an exaggeratedly serious expression. "Oh, Miss Rose," he said, his three eyes focusing intently on her. "Thank you so very much for introducing this delightful form of communication to our school." Rose was taken aback at first, unsure if he was being genuinely appreciative or attempting sarcasm. But as she saw the hint of a smirk tugging at the corners of his mouth, she realized he was indeed trying his hand at sarcasm. The entire cafeteria erupted in laughter, both at the professor's attempt and at the fact that such a serious, disciplined figure was engaging in something so uncharacteristically humorous. Professor Sel-Noor's experiment with sarcasm marked a turning point. With a respected professor openly embracing sarcasm, it was now officially part of the Academy's culture. However, as sarcasm continued to spread, it began to cause some unexpected problems. Not everyone understood it fully, and misunderstandings became frequent. Students would take sarcastic remarks at face value, leading to confusion and even arguments. There were incidents where sarcastic compliments were mistaken for genuine praise, or where light-hearted jabs were taken as serious insults. In one notable incident, Emerale had a misunderstanding with Kel, the telepathic student. Emerale had been practicing sarcasm, and, in an attempt to show off her new skills, she told Kel, "Oh, of course, I absolutely love it when you float around like a fog and make it impossible for anyone to see the board." Kel, who lacked a sense of physical boundaries due to his ethereal form, took her words as a genuine expression of frustration. Hurt and embarrassed, he began avoiding Emerale, assuming that she truly found his presence disruptive. It wasn't until Rose intervened and explained the intended humor behind Emerale's comment that Kel understood, but the incident left him hesitant to engage in sarcasm again. The administration soon took notice of these issues and began discussing whether sarcasm was having a negative impact on campus life. The Academy's head council convened to address the growing trend, inviting students, professors, and even Rose herself to share their perspectives. At the council meeting, Rose found herself in the spotlight. She was asked to explain the purpose and value of sarcasm, to defend it as more than just a frivolous or disruptive form of humor. She explained how, in human culture, sarcasm could serve as a way to bond, to express frustration in a non-confrontational way, and to bring levity to difficult situations. While sarcasm may seem confusing, Rose explained, it's a unique form of expression that allows people to communicate complex emotions without being entirely literal. It's like adding a layer of meaning to your words. Yes, it can be misunderstood, but when used properly, it's a tool for connection. Professor Sel-Noor, who had become an unexpected advocate for sarcasm, spoke in her defense. He admitted that, although he initially found sarcasm perplexing, he had come to appreciate its subtlety and its ability to challenge rigid thought patterns. Sarcasm requires us to think beyond the surface, to consider tone, context, and nuance, he argued. It encourages a more dynamic form of communication. The council ultimately decided that sarcasm would be allowed, but with some caution. They issued a gentle reminder to students and faculty to be mindful of cultural differences and to avoid sarcasm in situations where it might cause confusion or offense. Relieved, Rose returned to her normal routine, feeling a sense of accomplishment. Sarcasm was now an accepted part of the Academy's culture, and she had become something of a cultural ambassador, bridging the gap between human and alien communication styles. But little did she know, the changes she had set in motion were far from over. As sarcasm continued to evolve and spread, it began influencing not only how students spoke, but how they thought and interacted on a deeper level. For the first time, the Academy's inhabitants were experiencing the challenge and the joy of interpreting meaning beyond words. As the influence of sarcasm spread, Rose noticed that the Academy was no longer the same. What had once been a strict, highly disciplined institution focused solely on intellectual pursuit had, in a way, loosened up. Laughter, previously rare, now echoed through the halls, and students seemed more relaxed in their interactions. But alongside these changes came a few unintended consequences that Rose hadn't anticipated. Sarcasm, she realized, was a double-edged sword. Although it allowed her alien classmates to express themselves in new ways, it also introduced a subtle layer of complexity that some of them struggled to manage. Misunderstandings were becoming common, and there was a growing divide between students who fully embraced sarcasm and those who viewed it as disruptive. One day, a particularly tense incident brought the issue to a head. Rose was heading to her usual spot in the cafeteria when she overheard a conversation between Emerala and Kel. They were discussing a group project assigned by Professor Sel Nor, and Emerala, now a self-proclaimed sarcasm expert, tried to lighten the mood with a sarcastic comment. "Oh sure, Kel, because nothing says teamwork like you floating around without a single idea to contribute," she said, rolling her eyes. Kel, already sensitive about his difficulty in grasping sarcasm, took her words to heart. His form shimmered uneasily, shifting to darker shades as he processed her comment. To him, her sarcasm felt like a direct insult, a reminder of the challenges he faced in fully participating in a project that required both physical and intellectual input. He responded with an uncharacteristically sharp tone. "If my presence is such a hindrance, then perhaps I should simply remove myself from the group entirely," Kel replied, his mental voice tinged with hurt. Rose, sensing the tension, quickly stepped in. "Whoa, guys, let's take a step back. Emerala didn't mean that literally, Kel. She was just being sarcastic." But Kel's hurt expression didn't soften, and Emerala, too, seemed embarrassed. Rose realized that, while her friends had learned to mimic sarcasm, they hadn't yet fully grasped the social cues that accompanied it. To them, sarcasm was still a novelty, something to experiment with, not a subtle art that required careful consideration of context and audience. As the misunderstanding escalated, other students nearby began to notice. A small crowd gathered, watching the exchange with mixed expressions of curiosity and concern. Among them was Professor Sel Nor, who had come to the cafeteria to observe his students' interactions. He watched the scene unfold, his expression contemplative, as he weighed the impact of sarcasm on his students' relationships. Later that day, Rose was called into Professor Sel Nor's office. She entered, feeling a mixture of anticipation and dread. Had she gone too far? Had she introduced something into the Academy that was causing more harm than good? Professor Sel Nor sat across from her, his three eyes focused intently on her. "Miss Rose," he began, his tone measured, "I wanted to discuss the recent changes that have taken place at the Academy. Sarcasm has certainly brought a new dynamic to our institution. But I am concerned that, in our enthusiasm to adopt this form of humor, we may have overlooked its complexities." Rose felt a pang of guilt but remained composed. "I understand, Professor. Sarcasm is more than just words, it's about understanding each other's intent. I guess I didn't realize how hard that could be for people who've never used it before." Professor Sel Nor nodded thoughtfully. Indeed, Sarcasm requires a deep understanding of one's peers and knowledge of their intentions, emotions, and boundaries. In some ways, it is a very advanced form of communication, one that our students may not yet be fully equipped to handle. Rose considered his words carefully. She had introduced sarcasm to bring a bit of humor and humanity to the academy, but she hadn't anticipated the potential for misunderstanding. For humans, sarcasm was second nature, a way to bond and express emotions indirectly. But for her alien classmates, it was unfamiliar terrain, and they lacked the cultural instincts to navigate it effectively. Professor Sel-Nor leaned forward, his gaze softening. "Miss Rose, I am not suggesting that sarcasm has no place here. In fact, I believe it has taught us something valuable about human expression. However, I propose that we find a way to blend sarcasm with clarity, to ensure that it enhances rather than hinders our communication." Rose nodded, a sense of relief washing over her. "So, you're saying we should keep using it, but maybe learn to use it more carefully?" "Precisely," Professor Sel-Nor replied. "I suggest we establish a class study group if you will focus on understanding human communication in depth, not just sarcasm but other forms of subtlety, humor, and nuance. I believe that such an endeavor could enrich our students' understanding of not only language but also empathy and social awareness." Rose felt a surge of excitement. The idea of teaching a class on human communication was thrilling, and she could see the potential for it to bridge the cultural gaps that had emerged. Within weeks, the Human Communication and Expression class was announced, and students from various departments signed up, eager to delve deeper into the art of human interaction. Rose became the class's unofficial leader, guiding her classmates through discussions, role-playing exercises, and simulations that demonstrated the nuances of sarcasm, humor, and empathy. In one exercise, she paired students together and asked them to communicate a message using sarcasm, followed by a sincere expression of the same idea. The goal was to help them understand the contrast between the two and to practice interpreting tone and body language. As the lessons progressed, Rose noticed a shift. Her classmates began to approach sarcasm with a new level of thoughtfulness. They were learning not only to use sarcasm but also to understand when it was appropriate and when it might be better to be direct. Slowly, they began to master the art of balancing humor with empathy. The class also fostered unexpected friendships. Emerale and Kel, who had once clashed over a sarcastic remark, found common ground in their efforts to understand human expressions. They began working together on projects, developing a mutual respect that grew into a close friendship. Emerale even became Kel's sarcasm mentor, helping him navigate situations where sarcasm might be misunderstood. As the weeks went by, the academy transformed even further. Sarcasm, once a cause of confusion and conflict, became a tool for bonding and self-expression. Students who had once viewed each other with wariness and skepticism now shared inside jokes, their laughter echoing through the corridors. By the end of the term, Rose's class was a resounding success, and the Academy's head council decided to make it a permanent part of the curriculum. Human communication had become a valued subject, one that allowed students to explore emotions and intentions in ways they had never considered. On the last day of class, Professor Sel-Nor held a small celebration for the students. As they gathered around, sharing stories and reminiscing about the term, he raised a glass and offered a toast. "To Miss Rose, whose presence has brought us laughter, challenge, and insight. She has shown us that humor, even when complex, has the power to connect us all. May we continue to learn from her example and carry forward this new understanding of each other." Rose blushed, feeling a mix of pride and gratitude. She hadn't expected to leave such an impact on the academy, but she was glad to have brought a piece of her culture to this distant world. As the celebration continued, Rose realized that her journey at the Galactic Interspecies Academy had come full circle. She had arrived as an outsider, unsure of how she would fit in among beings so different from herself. But through a simple twist of humor, she had found a way to bridge the gap, helping her classmates see the world through a new lens. In the following years, Rose's class became a staple at the academy, drawing students from all over the galaxy who wished to study the art of human communication. Her influence remained long after she had graduated, leaving a legacy of humor, empathy, and connection that resonated across generations. As she looked around the room, watching her alien friends laugh and chat with the ease and warmth of close companions, Rose knew she had made a difference. The academy was forever changed, and in her heart she felt that she, too, had found a place where she truly belonged.